everybody, my name is Simone and I'm the neighborhood librarian here at Wright Library. So welcome to the Sustainable Speakers series and thank you again for coming out today. So before we begin, I'd just like to do a land acknowledgement. So we are gathered today on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. On behalf of the Saskatoon Public Library, we pay respect to the Indigenous ancestors of this place. As an organization that played an important role in the settlement of Saskatoon, and as a key memory institution, we acknowledge our responsibility to respond in meaningful ways to the calls of action. So the program tonight can only happen because of the partnership the library has with the Saskatchewan Environmental Society, who work hard to find knowledgeable speakers month after month. So I'm going to invite Carol first from the Saskatchewan Environmental Society to come up and do some talking here before Nancy comes up.
Thank you. The Saskatchewan Environmental Society has been working on important environmental issues since 1970, so about 55 years now. And so some of the things the Environmental Society works on are protection and expansion of habitat, the water and the opposing nuclear reactors, protecting our environment, reducing pollution. And I wanted to, well, if you want to know more about the Environmental Society, you should go to its website, environmentalsociety.ca, and there are at least one or two newsletters at the back which would have that information. And also, if you would like to join, there's information on that at the back of the room. Now, I wanted primarily, the reason I'm up here is I wanted to share with you concerns about the change to our building code in Saskatchewan. So on March 11th, in a press release, the Saskatchewan Environmental Society registered its disapproval with the government of Saskatchewan's decision to backtrack on their commitment to make buildings more energy efficient. Under the National Building Code, there are 5 energy efficiency performance tiers designed to achieve net zero building standards gradually over some years. Saskatchewan had adopted Tier 2 as the required minimum standard for new low-rise residential buildings, with plans to progress to Tier 3 in 2026. In an unexpected weakening, the government has now reverted to the lowest efficiency standard, Tier 1. And because of the regression, new Saskatchewan homes will be less energy efficient, burdening homeowners with higher operational costs and increased maintenance issues. In Saskatchewan, the energy bills with Tier 3 building standards are about 20% lower in their energy requirements than Tier 1, which is about $620 less per year. Saskatchewan Environmental Society calls on the Saskatchewan government to adopt higher building efficiency standards. So now I would turn this over to Nancy. And Nancy House will introduce our speaker.
Happy Earth Day. Welcome to this presentation of the Sustainability Speaker Series, which is a project of the Saskatchewan Environmental Society, of which Carol was just speaking. And I'm a volunteer with Carol. I'm Nancy House. We are very fortunate this evening to have with us an internationally recognized award-winning researcher, Harold Orr. Harold first worked as an architect, then earned an engineering degree, followed by a master's degree on building air infiltration at the University of Saskatchewan. Then continued research work on building efficiency with the National Research Council, both in Ottawa and in Saskatoon. And while doing that, Harold was enlisted to help build the world-renowned Saskatchewan Conservation House in Regina, completed in 1978, along with fellow research engineer Rob Dumont. And this is a quote from A History of the Chainsaw Retrofit. 5 years later, the two engineers set about to develop a technique for super insulating existing homes. Because the purest version of this insulation technique requires a building's roof overhangs to be lopped off, the method is referred to as a chainsaw retrofit. A quick Google search on chainsaw retrofit immediately rewarded me with this history, plus several other articles, including one entitled Harold Orr's Super Insulated Retrofits. So in 2009, Harold supervised a retrofit of a duplex, or what, was it a duplex? In Regina, leaving the roof chainsawing until the second year, so that the significance of wrapping and insulating the roof could also be measured. A few years later, a house in Saskatoon got a full chainsaw retrofit treatment with very impressive heating savings, and Harold has some quite illustrative slides of that. So, please help me welcome our speaker, Harold Orr.
I started out in 1943 as a carpenter, and my father needed a house and decided to build a house, and this was during the war, the Second World War. And at the time, lumber was not available for building houses. You could go to the lumber yard and buy lumber to make a chicken coop or make a barn, but you could not buy lumber to build a house. And we were in desperate need of a house. And so my father, the first year, I think it was likely 1941, went to the lumber yard and bought enough lumber to build a chicken house. Now he built it rather strangely in that the back wall of the chicken house was 2 feet high and the front wall was about 12 feet high, and then it had a sloping roof. But it worked very well for a chicken house, and we used it for a chicken house. The next year he went to the lumber yard and got lumber for a barn, a cow barn. And he built this cow barn, and it had a wall that was about 12 feet high on the one side and about 2 feet high on the other side with a sloping roof. And the third year he got enough lumber to make forms to pour a concrete basement. He had collected concrete, cement for some time, and we built but we didn't have lumber to build the walls of the house. But my father saw an article in Mechanics Illustrated about rammed earth construction, and so he decided, why don't we build the walls of the house out of rammed earth? And so I got the job. We had excavated the basement, which was primarily in clay, and made a pile of this clay outside the foundation. It required that you had 3 times as much sand as you have clay, and we had a cement mixer, and my job was to take a shovel full of clay and put it in the cement mixer, and then 3 shovels of sand and put it in the cement mixer, and then another shovel of clay and 3 shovels of sand, and I'd keep on doing this until we got the thing full of this mixture. And we allowed it to mix together, and then we dumped it out and put it in a formwork that was only 30 inches high, and this had bolts across it to hold the rammed earth that we put in the thing. We put in 6 inches of this mixture, And then my father had a tamper, and he would tamp this down, and then we would put another 6 inches in and tamp it down, and another 6 inches, until we got the forms filled. And then we'd unbolt the forms, lift them up on top of what we had done, and start all over again. And this is my experience as a junior carpenter. I was 12 years old at the time. Anyway, I did a little bit of carpenter work then through the time that I was in high school and so on. And when I met my wife and we got married, the first thing I did was I hired on as, I'd built a house, a couple of houses already, but I hired on with the largest house builder in Saskatchewan, Engineered Homes, and to build the Gladmar Apartments in Regina. And we were building 320 units, or 84 plexes. And I worked on there, and I started out making roof trusses. And then they put me on to fix the problems that other crews had made in the units. So I'd go in and repair the problem, and go on to the next one, and repair the problem, and go on to the next one. And I saw an ad in the paper for, the provincial government was looking for an architectural draftsman to work with. At the time, the provincial government had an architect, and they wanted somebody to work as a provincial, under the provincial architect, to apprentice under him. And so I started work as an apprentice under the provincial architect, and I was in practically every building that was owned by the provincial government in Saskatchewan. And including, you know, in the legislative buildings, up at the peak of the dome, top of the dome, up at the top of that, there's what they call a lantern. I've been there. I've been on every floor. I've been in every room in the legislature. I've been in every room in the government building next to it where they have offices and so on. I have been in basically every building that the provincial government owned at that time in the province. And the reason I got that job was that I'd started engineering, and I had taken 2 years of engineering, and I had engineering drawing. So, okay, I could work then as a with the provincial architect. And I worked there. Then I got married, and we needed, I was doing my thesis work, and one of the university just didn't have the equipment I needed to do work on the thesis I was working on. The problem was at that time, there was no way, and nobody knew how much air was leaking into houses. And I decided to write a thesis on a method to measure how fast the air was leaking in a house. And what I started out doing was using helium. We'd take a tank of helium and dump it into the cold air of the furnace, and allow the furnace to mix this through the house. And then my equipment would measure how fast the helium disappeared. And from that, then we could tell how fast the air was changing. And I worked at this, and when I got my thesis done, the National Research Council put me on staff, and I started to do more research in buildings. And so anyway, well, this is a long story, but let's get started here. why did we call it chainsaw burn? We had to make the house smooth so that we could wrap it in a plastic bag. So we take a chainsaw and cut the eaves and the overhang off the house to make it an e-box. How do you make a house airtight? You go to Mr. Glad and ask him to make a bag for your house, and you put the house in it and twist the top, and you've got it airtight. The problem is that most people don't realize just how much heat is lost by the air in the house. How did we get to where we are today? Where did we come? Where should we be going? Well, we live up in the red dot there, just on the edge of the dark blue. And these are temperature gradients for the North American continent. And there's basically no other place in the country except Saskatoon and Prince Albert, where the heat loss is greatest, that we're in this dark blue area. Anyway, well, Saskatchewan housing goes back 10,000 or 18,000 years. And there's a house that has no insulation, zero tightness, but it's portable. This is a house that my grandfather built in 1907. Now, what he built was this portion here, which he built in 1907. And then in 1915, they had a bumper crop, and so he added a two-story addition. Unfortunately, this house didn't have a square inch of insulation. And it wasn't very tight either. So it had quite an extensive heat loss to the thing. Fortunately, he was close by the coal fields in southern Saskatchewan, and was able to, with a horse and wagon, go from the house and go to the mine and mine the coal, put it in the wagon, bring it home, and they could heat the house. But it wasn't very efficient. Oh boy, look at that. Well, this is the house that I was telling you about that my father built in 1943. This has the wall, the walls here, fiddle, I got the wrong machine. The walls here are 18 inches thick, up to about there, and then from there up is this 2 feet of the chicken coop, and this is the roof of the chicken coop, and on the back is the barn and the 2 feet of roof wall there. And unfortunately, this house, the walls here are about an R2. Now, if you know anything about R values, R2 is practically nothing. But the walls are 18 inches thick, and they store a lot of heat. And when they're warm, we could go away in the wintertime for about a week, and it wouldn't freeze in the house. But when we came home, we had to run the furnace flat out for the next week in order to get it warm enough to live in. So, go on. This was built, the house I live in was built in 1963. It is a 2x4 wall. At the standard time, the insulation was R7, a 2-inch thick batt. And the contractor was planning on putting this in the house, and I asked him to use what they called the full thick batt made by Owens Corning. And he said, it's going to cost extra for that. And I said, fine, tell me how much extra it is. He came back and he said, it costs will cost $25 extra to build this house. At the time, I was told it would never pay for itself. But currently, it's saving me about $400 a year in oil. When oil was $3 a barrel. Okay. Next. In the OPEC crisis, this is the price of gas with oil from the Arabs back in 1967 and 1973. They decided they weren't getting enough for their oil, and they decided to double the price. And so they doubled the price and it went up. And as a result of that, the Saskatchewan legislature asked the Saskatchewan Research Council to design and build a solar house appropriate for Saskatchewan. And the man they put in charge of this had no experience in building. He was a scientist, but he had no experience in building. So he asked a group of people to sit on a committee to help him design this solar house appropriate for Saskatchewan. And we went to work on this, and we built the Saskatchewan Conservation House. This is at 11 Rink Avenue in Regina. And what you can see here is we made the walls thick enough to put R40 in the walls. We made the best windows that were available were only double glazed. So we put shutters on the windows, and these are electrically operated. All they had to do is flip a switch and the shutter would go up, and flip the switch back and it would go down, park itself down over the windows. The upper windows here had shutters that would slide back into the wall in the cavity here. And this is the solar collectors. They're vacuum tube solar collectors. And it heated hot water, and the hot water was stored in a 2,000-gallon tank in the corner of the house. And they used this to take the hot water, run it through a radiator, and provide hot air for the house. Now, the problem was, the first year, the maintenance cost on the solar system was $10,000. The second year, the maintenance cost on the solar collectors was $5,000. They sold the house after the end of the second year, and the new owner took the solar collectors off immediately. So anyway, the house is still there. It looks very much the same. I think they've taken off this roof peak up there, and this is vacant. And but it doesn't have a basement, or at this time it didn't have a basement. It had grade beam and pile foundation. And the owner went in under this back corner here and excavated down into the piles and excavated underneath the house to put a garage underneath the house. But the floor of the house has R30, the walls have R40, and the ceiling has R60 in it. And I personally went down and installed the vapor barrier because I didn't know of anybody in the world who had experience enough to put on a vapor barrier as tight as we wanted. And we achieved, at that time, half an air change per hour at 50 pascals, which is exceptionally tight for a house. But when Wolfgang Fest came over from Germany and saw this house, he was really taken with it, and he went back to Germany, and they, as a result of that, they have put on what they call the passive house. And if anybody wants to build or renovate or anyway, they must bring their new construction or their repairs up to this passive house standard. Now, the passive house standard requires that it be, the air change can only be 0.6 air changes at 50 pascals. This was 0.5. And I only know of one contractor. There was a contractor in Winnipeg who was building double wall houses. And double wall houses allow you to make air tightness much easier than it does with conventional construction. And he was building double wall houses and achieving 0.1 air change at 50 pascals. Very, very tight. So, thank you. When you take a look at a house, conventional house, here's the heat loss pie, if you like. You take the and you can divide it roughly into 3 equal parts. There's this part, and those 3 pieces. Now, this is the basement, this is air leakage, and that's windows and doors. That's the ceiling, and that's the walls of the house. Now, when we add very much more insulation to the walls, we can reduce this to just a sliver. We can do this as the ceiling if we go from what has normally been the insulation about R15 to R20. You go to R60 and you can reduce this to a sliver. This is the windows and the doors, and the windows now you can buy triple glazed double OE argon filled windows, and that reduces this pie here to maybe 3%. But what about air leakage? Unfortunately, most people don't do anything to that. Now, they do to the basement. They can insulate the basement walls, they can insulate the floor, they can so on. They can reduce that. But the big problem is the one here, is air leakage. Now, how do we get rid of air leakage? Rob Dumont and I worked on this, and we came up what is known as now as the prairie double wall. And Tony Seaman there built his house here in Saskatoon using this technique. And what we do is the inner wall is 2x4s, and it's the structure that holds the building up. The outer wall is set away from the inner wall to make space between the walls. But we place the vapor barrier not on the inside of the inner wall, but on the outside of the inner wall, and then we put sheathing on top of it. And this makes it very much easier because it moves the vapor barrier, the polyethylene air barrier, 3.5 inches away from the people with sharp knives that work on the inside of the house. And as a result of that, you can quite easily make a house very, very airtight. And this is a cross section of the Saskatchewan Conservation House, we insulated the walls. Unfortunately, we didn't use the double wall that we thought. We'd placed the vapor barrier right behind the drywall, but I did a job, and I think we did a very good job on that. We put a vapor barrier in the floor and a vapor barrier in the ceiling. Now, one of the problems that we have in conventional housing is, well, take, for example, my house, 1370 Wilson Crescent. It's a 1,100 square foot house, but it has 160 lineal feet of interior partition. That partition has two sides to it, and the vapor barrier comes over and has to join with a piece of vapor barrier over the wall. And I've looked up in attics, I've been in hundreds of attics, and I've looked up there, and what I found out is that this crack along the partitions can be anything from nothing to a half an inch. And I would say on the average, it averages about a 1/16 of an inch. So we have 320 feet of interior partition plus 140 feet of the outside walls. And if their crack is a 1/16 of an inch, it makes a hole that's big enough that I can crawl through it easily. It's bigger than the attic hatch if I left the attic hatch out. And this is the major problem in terms of airtightness in housing. How do you get rid of that? With the prairie double wall, what we do is we put up the outside walls, then we place the roof trusses on top of the outside walls. And because the outside walls are a little higher than the normal inside walls, they're about 3/4 of an inch higher than the inside walls, because you fasten the two walls together with a strip of plywood at the bottom of the wall and the top of the wall. This allows you then to put the vapor barrier on the ceiling of the house as a large piece, 20 feet wide by 1,000 feet long. And so you can do it with two pieces of normally put the vapor barrier on the ceiling with two pieces and one joint in it. And if you then seal the joint carefully with acoustical sealant and seal it, it's airtight. And then you can come in and place the interior partitions in the house after you have the vapor barrier and drywall on the ceiling. And it makes it so much more airtight that I don't know why everybody doesn't do it. Go on. Things which were developed in this area. First, proof of concept set for insulation in very tight housing. A blower door for tightness testing versus previous gas molecule test, multiple day duration. My master's thesis was an instrument to measure air infiltration in housing using tracer gas. It has problems, but we used the blower to build the blower door as a result of that. The first residential air-to-air heat exchanger were used on the Saskatchewan Conservation House. Dick Van Nee was working at the university at the time as a technician, and he built the air-to-air heat exchanger using strips of plywood and sheets of polyethylene. And we have developed software tools to quickly evaluate designs, and I called this HotCam, and we turned it over to Energy Lines and Resources, and they said, well, we can't call it HotCam because that's the name you gave the program, but we'll call it Hot 2000. Now, Hot 2000 is still available. If you go on your computer and go to Energy Mines and Resources. They will give you, send you free of charge, Hot 2000. They have several versions of it for architects, for engineers, for tradespeople, for various things. And it's now free of charge. And originally, I think we sold it for about $300 a copy. Anyway, stop putting solar thermal on the house in Saskatchewan due to expense. We put solar on the Saskatchewan Conservation House. Rob Dumont built a house which has been advertised as the best insulated house in the world. It has R60 in the walls, R80 I believe in the attic, and it has triple glazed windows and all the rest, and likely the best insulated house in the world. But anyway, he had put solar on it too, but he took it off. Anyway, this led to the formation of EBA and the R2000 in Canada and Passive House in Europe. From EBA website, a small contingent of building professionals representing the United States, Canada, and Sweden gathered in Pine Island, Minnesota in early 1982 to develop criteria for the construction of buildings that were more energy efficient. These forward-looking pioneers created the Energy Efficient Building Association, or EBA, and I was the first president. Usually, what to do with existing homes. Usually in Canada, we will strap the walls and place 2 inches of SM or replace the windows. My solution I like to call it chainsaw retrofit. And retrofit examples from Saskatchewan. The first house done early in 1984, 31 Dipper Crescent, which is just across the Circle Drive, just off Wilson Crescent. And we took, we took a saw and cut the eaves and the overhang off it. And we wrapped the roof and put insulation on top of the roof and down the walls. We only went down to a foot below grade. And since then we've found that we've done it several times, and we get a backhoe and dig down to the footings and carry the vapor barrier from the peak of the roof down the walls and right down the walls to the footings and seal it to the footings. Slides below are fourplex and Regina done in the 80 and 25 years later. Okay. Why retrofit except for the foundation structure is sound? This is the unit in Regina. Very high energy use. Very uncomfortable. We need a new heating system. We need new windows and doors. We need a new exterior finish, and unable to build because of zoning. Now, this is a fourplex that has 4 units that are 3 feet in the ground, and then on top of that there are 4 units above, and you come in at ground level and go up a half flight or down half a flight, and this little entry is on the front and also on the back. Here's the unit before we started. You see the front entry here sticks out 4 feet and 8 feet wide, and there's the roof. Anyway, there's no soffit under the roof here. The rafters are painted and stick out under there, and this is the unit. Anyway, what we did there was on the outside we dug down to the footings and we wrapped the basement wall with polyethylene, carrying it out right up to the ceiling. And we then built a pressure-treated wooden wall out of 2x6 and had space there for our 14-inch, our 12 insulation. And then after we got finished, we put in weeping tile, granular material, and backfilled it. And the end walls, the roof joists go from the front of the house to the back, not to the ends. And so the end walls and the basement, the whole foundation is concrete block. And we found out that we could remove the concrete blocks without tools, basically. We just grab them and pull them out. And the inner wall here is a 2x2, and it had 3/8-inch drywall on the inside. And how much insulation did it have? Less than that. It didn't have a square inch of insulation in the whole basement. So anyway, we went ahead and removed the concrete block on the end walls and had the backhoe and dug it down. And then this shows a little premature, unfortunately. Then we bolted this down, and then realized that we should have put the polyethylene on the wall here. So we took it out and put the polyethylene on the wall. And then these are for the new studs. And put the studs in place, and then insulated between the vapor barrier and the studs, and then insulated in the studs. And then we put plywood on the outside and waterproofing and so on. Here's this is the long walls now. We put polyethylene on the walls, carefully sealing the joints, and sealing it at the foundation, and then carrying it up the top. And there's our first layer of insulation in the end, then the second layer, and then it has a third layer as well. And this gives us then about our 36 R values on the walls. Carried up the vapor barrier and then continued it up to the roof. And here's our pressure-treated plywood below ground, and then OSB above ground. And then we put waterproofing on this, and we put weeping tile and granular material on the outside before we put it back in place. Now, this shows the other wall, and up above, and on the end walls, like this one here, this is an end wall. We went right over the windows because that was a window in the bathroom, and the bathroom doesn't need a window, just turn the lights on. And these studs here, which you see here, they're at 4 foot on center, and we got it together, and then we put the extra studs in there to make it at 2 foot on center. We supported the studs here back on this end wall with these metal straps, and back it up here. We needed to add some electrical to the house. So they had one great big monstrous furnace a 350,000 BTU furnace, and then it had hot air ducts from the furnace to each suite. And what do we do with this furnace? Basically, the furnace was worn out anyway. So we took it out and threw it away, and we installed a 20,000 BTU natural gas fireplace, one in the living room of each suite. The only problem is you never see the fireplace come on, because the only time it comes on is at night when you're in bed. But anyway, and we put in electric heaters, a 500-watt electric heater in each bedroom. But before we started this construction, the January bill was for heat was $400. The February bill was $400. The March bill was $400. The bill for April came around and was $650. And after we got finished, the bill for the heating of the house now is about $400 a year for all 4 suites. So, anyway, then we put that's finish on it, and we put stucco mesh on, ready for stucco. These are the new windows, triple glazed windows, and new doors. But we didn't do anything to the roof, and the roof didn't need anything at that time, and we thought, well, let's leave it. And we left it for 1 year and found out that the roof was leaking, and so we went at it the next year. Here's the house, stuccoed and so on. And then we decided to go on the roof. And so what we did there was, around the edge, we put a 2x6 on edge. And 4 feet away, we put another 2x6, and another 4 feet away, another 2x6. And then we put 2x6, 2x8s the other way at 4 feet on center. And then at 2 feet on center, on top of that, we put 2x4s. And so we filled this with R20, R20, and R12. So we now have 52, R52, plus there was about R25 in the attic. So that makes it very close to R80 for the attic, for the roof. And we put a sloping roof on the outer edge, and we put steel roofing on the top so we wouldn't have to touch it. And this is the working on the roof. And the old roof sheathing here was just boards. And what we did at the edge here is we cut a strip of 2 inches wide along through the sheathing, and we put the vapor barrier in this little trough, and then nailed a 1x2 on top of it to seal it down to the blocking that was in the rafters. If I back up here, oops, there's this blocking here between the rafters. We sealed the vapor barrier to it, and we nailed strips of plywood on the vapor barrier to seal to this blocking. So then when we cut this piece out of the sheathing on the roof, we put the vapor barrier into there and then nailed a 1x2 on top of it, so that the vapor barrier was carefully sealed to this blocking, both the top and the bottom. The result was that when we did the blower door tests on this house, before we started, the blower door test said it was 11 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. After we had done this, we're down below 2 air changes per hour. Not super, but very much better. And I think most of the leakage is, and thinking about it afterwards, is at the front and the back entries. We were not able to seal the floor, the vapor barrier in the floor system, and that's where most of the air leakage is, I think. We nailed strips of OSB on the roof at 4 foot on center, and then we put the verticals up against that, and then we put 2 by 8s up this way, continuing this way, and then on top of that we have space there for there were 2 by 6, 2 by 6, and a 2 by 4 on top. And we carefully sealed the vapor barrier around plumbing stacks and sealed all the joints in the vapor barrier as to try and make it as tight as possible. And we anchored the 2 by 6 down by matting these and that's screwed into the rafter, and this is screwed into the 2 by 6 on top of it. And this is the pile of insulation that we put on the roof. And there's the OSB going on top of the top sheathing. And then we put a Tyvek moisture barrier and then the steel roofing on top of that. And we don't expect to have to do anything to repair the roof for another 35 years or so. There's the before, there's the after. Notice the sloping just at the edge. And it's made a marvelous difference to the building. First of all, there's the fireplace. There's 1 fireplace, 2 fireplaces, and there's another one down here on either side of the thing. And those in the corner of the living room. And that 20,000 BTU fireplace keeps the space warm. They really don't need to use the electric heaters in the bedrooms. We put electric heaters in the bedrooms and infrared heat lamp with a 10-minute timer in the bathroom. So when you have a shower, you turn on the infrared light and you can sit under it and toast when you get out of the shower. Okay. Materials for the basement cost us $4.24 per square foot. Including the top floor is $2.72, including vinyl siding, but we put on stucco, which are basically the same price. And materials for the roof insulation cost $3.80 per square foot, including the steel roofing. Results: air leakage went from 11 air change per hour to down to 1.97 air changes of 50. And original costs, we went from 342 gigajoules to 209 gigajoules. And estimated heating costs allows a reduction of about 82% in air leakage. Total reduction of 85% in heat loss for the building. Now, this is 14 Mills Crescent. I think this is the one that I would say to you is the best example I have of a house doing a retrofit on. The young couple that bought this house, they just got married and bought the house. And the first thing they did was to go up in the attic and blow 6 inches of cellulose up in the attic, because they said there just isn't enough insulation there. So the second year, they took out the furnace and put in a high efficiency furnace. They went from an 80% of furnace to a 96% furnace. And while they were doing this, the contractor said, "We've got to do something with your water heater." And I said, "Well, what's wrong with the water heater?" Well, he said, "There just isn't enough heat from the exhaust of the water heater to make the chimney work like a chimney." So they said, "Well, what should we do?" And he said, "Well, what I would suggest you do is put in a direct vent water heater." So they did. Now the chimney is totally dead. A dead chimney, the air doesn't go up it, it can actually come in to the house through the chimney. And about March of that year, John asked me, "Would you come over and look at my house?" I went over and we looked up in the attic, and there's about 2 inches of frost on the underside of the roof up in the attic. And I said, "Well, when it warms up a bit, that's going to melt, fall down on your cellulose insulation. It'll wet the cellulose insulation. Not only this year, but next year and 10 years from now and 20 years from now. And about 20 years from now, you're going to have to tear the roof off and put a whole new roof on." So he said, "What do I do?" And I said, "Well, my suggestion is we do a chainsaw retrofit." And so here's the chainsaw retrofit. We've already cut the eaves off and actually used a chainsaw to do it. And then we wrapped the roof with 6mm poly, put strapping on there so you could walk on the roof, and also to hold our strapping on the roof. And here's the first row of strapping on the roof, and then the second row here. These are 2x6. And then we put insulation in here, a new sheathing on the roof, and on the basement what we did was we put 2x6s horizontally, starting about 6 inches above the footing. And then we put our 22 batts of insulation between the strapping. So these are about 28.5 inches apart. And then we made panels 8 feet by 8 feet with 2x6s, and we insulated these with R20, and we had R20 on the wall, so that gives us R40 for the basement. And then this is a pulley and cable, and so we were able to pull them up there and then lower them into the foundation and fasten them together, and that's the top of the basement wall. That's going to be the top of the basement. And then we went from there up to the rafters sticking out and put insulation in there. And there's 2x4 on the bottom, 2x4s. See, these are nailed to the top of the rafters. It's spaced then for insulation. And we put our 40 insulation in the walls, plus the R7 that was originally there. So now we have about R56 insulation in the walls. And they put in new windows, triple glazed, in the outer side. And you can see the vapor barrier very carefully. It sealed the joints and so on. And here you can see the joints being sealed. There's insulation, 2 layers of R12 insulation there, another layer of R12 there. So R36 on the walls. what have we learned? Airtightness is of paramount importance. That's paramount importance. And airtightness is best achieved on the outside of the building. A heat recovery ventilator is essential. We have extraordinary comfort and we have supreme quietness. This is one thing in terms of the unit in Regina. It's on a very, very busy street. And the traffic going by there and the horns honking and so on. And before, day and night, it was uncomfortable in the house. Now they don't hear it. When we did the energy showcase here in Saskatoon, one of the builders did an R60 walls, house with R60 walls, and I was in the house looking at it, and it was strange because the house was shaking. I couldn't understand this. The house was shaking, but no sound. House was shaking. Looked out the back window of the house, and there's a bulldozer running back and forth along lots, leveling out all the dirt. But you couldn't hear it. You could only feel the shaking of the whole house. Airtightness is of paramount importance. Airtightness is best achieved on the outside, and the heat recovery and ventilation is essential. And we have extraordinary comfort, extraordinary quietness, and point sources of heat work well. In the Regina one, we have this natural gas fireplace, 20,000 BTU fireplace to heat 1,000 square foot suite. And it's in the corner, one corner of the unit, in the living room. And we put in electric heat in the bedrooms, 500 watt electric heat in the bedrooms. They're never turned on. They're never used. Because you usually want your bedroom a little cooler than the living room. And it's a little cooler in the living room because the heat is, the bedrooms are away from the heat source. Well, remember this slide? The big chunk is this one, air leakage. And it's the most important factor in making a house energy efficient. And it really doesn't cost, except that you need to insulate it. If you put it on the outside, you need to add insulation on the outside of it to keep it warm so that you don't have condensation on it. But for the air tightness part of it, air tightness is likely one of the cheaper components, and it gives you the best bang for your buck. This is what it sort of looks like. Strong conventional retrofit using along with 2 inches of SM on walls and window replacement. But we still have the very large heat loss due to infiltration, and we can still have a large loss for the basement. But if you work on the air tightness, savings when doing a chainsaw retrofit, that's the savings you get, and it works much better. Build tight, ventilate right. Don't forget existing homes as we go focus on new builds. Sometimes the old guys knew what they were doing.